and welcome everyone.
Thank you, Rabbi.
I'm so glad you're here. This week is Parshas HaChodesh. Parshas HaChodesh. What does that mean? It means that welcome. It means Hashem says
Wow.
to the Jewish people that you're getting your first mitzvah. HaChodesh is Elechem Rosh Chodashim. You're getting something fresh. The Jewish people are getting the first instruction to follow a different calendar than the rest of the world. That the first month of the year is going to be Nisan. Now, my great grandfather, Rabbi Elchanan Tzvi Guderman, who I was named after, was born in Kalvaria, Lithuania. You're good. He was born in Kalvaria in 1883 in Lithuania. He learned in Slobodka, and then he wound up coming to the United States in the early 1900s, where for more than 60 years, he was first a Rav in Atlanta, and he eventually was the rabbi in Scranton, Pennsylvania for about 60 years. And we recently got from one channel or another a full volume of his that he wrote of his drushas in the early 1900s, in the 10s and 20s. There was a year or two that he sat down. So this one is Tuf Resh Ayin Dalid. Tuf Resh Ayin Dalid is 90 years ago. This was his drasha on Parshas Vayikra for Parshas HaChodesh, for Shabbos HaChodesh. He wrote down, it looks like it was for publication. Feldheim had it and just never published it. And somehow it came to me. So I have it in the house. And I want to share with you what he said that week to Jews in America in the 1930s, and then go from there. Okay, so he says that Garcinin b'Shabbos on Daf Yud Gimel Amud Beis Nimnu v'Ravu Beis Shammai al Beis Hillel v'Shmona Asar Dvarim Gazu Bo b'Yom. So there was a time that Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel were debating for some time, and eventually they made decrees about all kinds of topics. For example, one of them was they made a decree at that time, which we still follow today, about how we deal with non-Jewish bread and wine and oil because of intermarriage. There were Jews, he says it's lapella. If you look at what was happening in history at that time, that they were making these decrees about Gentile wine, so that you don't intermarry. He says, Hayusaret Sava mitaksim etza echla hagines chomos umivtzure Yerushalayim min chitze haralim. They were literally at that moment when this was being decreed, they were trying to defend Jerusalem from the Roman arrows, he says. And Bo Talmidei Shammai ba'aliyah achas. And he says the students of Shammai go up into the attic and they're talking about bread and wine. And he says, he says, I need you to understand something. It's 2,000 years since then. The Jewish people have been exiled all over the world. The land of Israel has had its challenges. But Torah's Yisrael, b'yachad imam Yisrael, the Jewish people and our Torah are intact. How did this happen? He says, Yan ki gozru v'hivdilu es b'nei Yisrael mitpitam v'yenam v'shmanam, because we stayed away and ate our own foods, drank our own wine, and therefore didn't intermarry. When we were being attacked by the Romans and things were going sour, what looked like an obsession with some sort of religious nonsense actually was saving the Jewish people, not just then, but that we should last thousands of years, he says. That's what he says. He says, when it comes to microbes, he writes, Ketanim, asher lo yiru ach yaziko ad lema'od. He says, these things are like scientifically we have idea. He was saying that there are things that you can't see them, you can't understand quite how they work, but they're very dangerous. And then he quotes the Gemara in Maseches Kedushin about how the rabbis of the Gemara insisted that people continue using Jewish language. Micah and esrog are the different words for Jewish language. They should continue and not switch the words. And misan and Micah. So he says, it's extremely important that we maintain our own identity, our own chukenu, torasenu, lishonenu, anu. We shouldn't turn into goyim who happen to be Jewish. We should have our own months. We should have our own. He says there were three things that the Jewish people got out of Egypt for, and none of them are mitzvahs. He says they didn't change their names and their language and their clothing. So it's interesting. In the Midrashim, it's scattered around, but there is such a Midrash that says the Jews didn't change their name, their language, and their clothing. So now you look at which mitzvah is it to not wear denim, jeans or something? Like, that's fine to wear. And which mitzvah is it? And the truth is, Rav Moshe Feinstein in the Igros Moshe says nowadays none of this really applies because we have the Torah. So once you have the Torah to give you all that identity, you can have whatever name you want. And he starts going through the different great rabbis of the Gemara who had names, Antigonus, right? All these different Greek names. And he says Rav Moshe ben Maimun and Rabbeinu Peter in the Tosos, Rabbeinu Peter, they had people that, so he says now it's much less important, but man nasi man hayom, but says Grandpa Guterman, he says, what are we going to do today? He says, our Talmud Torah is no longer called a Talmud Torah, it's Hebrew school. Hey Yud Beis Reish Vav Samach Kuf Vav Hey Lamed, Hebrew school. He says, our Hachnasos Orchem here in Scranton is called the Hebrew Charities. The Gemilus Chasadim is called the Loan Society. He says, Zem Mekarves Hisbolus. He says, friends, this is going to bring more intermingling. This is going to bring assimilation. The Torah insisted that as soon as we left Mitzrayim, even before leaving, we would leave with HaChodesh Zalachem, below January or February. Rishonu, our month, we're going to define our calendar by our events and our experiences. So this was his message to Jews in this country of hisbolulus, you understand, of assimilation, of hachodesh zelochem. You're going to have your own months, you're going to have your own calendar, you're going to have your own holidays. It becomes therefore very significant that little things like this is a challenge in the modern contemporary world of what do you do with Halloween? You understand, like the amount of Orthodox Jews who are taking their kids out to trick or treat. So you think, like, what are the halachic details? And then people get into the halachic stuff, and I think they might be missing the whole point. I think one of the big places that Rabbi Wilk has this right about Jewish music. For a while, they were investing enormous amounts of money in the concert, but just that Jewish music. So what is Jewish? So the truth is, whatever little kids listen to, it's really not usually the most sophisticated stuff. But the idea that we have our own music, we have the Miami Boys Choir, whatever it is, right? This kind of a thing. So I can be sympathetic to an adult who has this attitude. Yeah, feel free to move a chair, make some comfortable. So yeah, you guys just sit together. It's important. So in general, this attitude it's quite significant that a Jew should feel comfortable in the Jewish spaces. They should be comfortable. Okay, so that was the first thing that I just wanted to bring up to sort of frame what we're going to learn now, and that is a very interesting Gemara in Masechah Shabbos and the corresponding Medrash. HaChodesh Hazel Lachem Rosh Chodashim. The power of community, of impact, of friends, of rabbis. Listen to this one. There was a great rabbi named Rabbi Elazar ben Aruch, and he shows up in the following context. Amar Rabbi Chelbo. Rabbi Chelbo taught, Chamra de Frugaisa. It was the Chamra. That means the wine of Frugaisa, and the waters of Diomeses, the spas. There was hot springs or something. And these places, Kipchu Aseres Hashvatim. If you want to know why the Jewish people lost 10 tribes, and then the majority of the Jewish people were lost, and they left behind, they're the lost tribes. They may never be coming back. It's not clear. According to the Gemara Sanhedrin, there's different positions. So they're gone. They left the Jewish people. You know what it was? It was wine and spas. So you have to be careful not to get pulled after the delights of the world. Your whole life becomes, there are people today, this sounds silly, but there are people today who really their whole life, they work so hard all year so that they can afford very expensive vacations to basically drink expensive wine and have a spa treatment on the cruise. That's what they're doing their whole life. If they would just cut out that whole focus, and that, or they're going to retire and just sit by a swimming pool for the rest of, their whole life becomes colored by this. Um, Very destructive. So simple reading. Over obsession with the pleasures of this world can take you away from everything. I mean, a person can choose. I meet people that choose to have a smaller family so that they can go on better vacations. They will have less money to tour Europe, which is something they've always wanted to do, and therefore they'll bring one less Jewish life into the world. It's bonkers, the level of joy that people will have from their children, the accomplishment spiritually. Right? It's just like a very. Now listen, you can never judge anybody. You never know why Hashem blesses one person with this many. It's like not. This is not about pointing any fingers, but some of us know these people that are actually making the choice that way. It's bonkers. That's happened to the 10 tribes. And then there was a great rabbi named Rabbi Elazar ben Arach, who we'll find out more about because he was really an exceptional person. He arrived over there to Frugaisa and Diomasis. I don't know where that was. There's some Roman place. Imshach Basrahu, and he got carried away with the drinking. Okay. Iakar Talmudah, he forgot his Torah learning. He forgot his learning. He used to be one of the great rabbis who may have been greater than everyone else combined. I mean, you see like how it describes him. Forgot everything. Ki hadar asa, when he came back to the Torah world, kam lemikre b'sifra, they called him for an aliyah. And in those days, people would read their own aliyah to the Torah. Ba'al lemikre hachodesh hazeh lachem. So it was his time to read hachodesh hazeh lachem. It was Parshas HaChodesh this week. Amar hacharesh haya libam. He said, instead of hachodesh, he said hacharesh. Instead of hazeh, he said haya. And instead of lochem, he said libam. So he mixed up a resh with a dalid. Okay, that happens. A zayin with a yud, that's probably the hardest one. And a beis with a chaf. He mixed them up. The rabbis davened for him and he remembered his learning. So the influence of his group of friends getting together and praying on his behalf had a very good impact on him. Welcome.
What does the other expression mean?
So what on earth does it mean? Hacharesh. Cheresh means death. Haya, hachodesh is alachem, we know, and hacharesh or hacheresh haya libam. Their hearts went deaf. They couldn't hear anymore. So who's he talking about? So according to some, he's talking about himself. He can't write it like it was the Maharsha explains that the fact that Rabbi Elazar ben Arach made this mistake on this specific pasuk was very telling about his experience. He didn't really forget how to read. Farshim will say he was still very brilliant. There were things that he was trying to teach about the Chodesh. That's what many of the Farshim say. We'll see a little bit. The things he was trying to teach in some of the most difficult areas of Torah, that when he came back from this vacation, however long it was, he was unable to remember anymore. He had dulled his spiritual senses, and it was as if he couldn't. But of course, they all say that a Tana wasn't able to read. I mean, that's absurd. So this came out of his mouth. Now I'll tell you. Okay, so we'll go back. We'll go in order. That's a story of Rabbi Elazar ben Arach. Now, there is a Mishnah in Maseches Avos about Rabbi Elazar ben Arach that I'll just read to you, where he says, listen to this. This is in the second chapter, Mishnah Tes, and it says that Amar Lahem, Tzu'uru ezu derech yashar sheyadach b'ha'olam. So the rabbis were discussing what is the straight path that a person should cleave to in life. Now listen to what other people say. Rabbi Eliezer said a good eye in tova, have a good perspective. Rabbi Yoshua says chaver tov, a good friend. Rabbi Yossi says shachen tov, a good neighbor. Rabbi Shimon said haroa es hanolad. Right? Rabbi Elazar ben Arach says roas hanolad means someone who can predict the future. In other words, somebody with a good sense of if you do this, here's what's going to happen. So make good choices in the beginning. Yeah. And Rabbi Elazar ben Arach, he said, Leiv Tov, having a good heart is the main thing. So This Amalahem Roani as Divrei Elazar ben Arach Midivrechem. Shebichlal Devar of Divrechem. The truth is, in a good heart, I mean, all of these things are included. Now, how is a good friend involved in a good heart exactly? It's hard to say. How is a good neighbor having a good? I mean, it's very hard to read this Mishnah. Predicting the future is part of having a good heart. I mean, it's hard to. It needs a lot of work. Each one of those needs work. But Rabbi Elazar ben Arach did not say it was so important to have a good friend. He didn't say it was so important to have a good neighbor. Now, there is a sefer called Shvilei Chaim. Shvilei Chaim is a relatively recently published sefer by Mechon Yerushalayim of Rabbi Chaim Finkelstein. Rabbi Chaim Finkelstein was a student of Rabbi Avram Yafin and the Alter of Novardok in the Novardok Yeshiva in Bialystok. So he had like a little bit of a Musar perspective that came from his youth. Listen to what he says here in the Shvilei Chaim. He says, when Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai asked his students, what's the good midah that a person should really make the center of their avodas Hashem? Rabbi Elazar ben Arach said it was a good heart. What would he have responded to the person who said it's about having a good friend? He would have said, Chaver tov eino osa al das atzmo, rak sholem meyayitz v'nimtza tamid b'cheves hachachamim borech me'anshei resha ki rabba hashba'asam. So the one who said it's about having a good friend would say, listen, when you have a good friend to keep you on the straight and narrow and you don't do anything major without consulting with your good friend, so then you'll wind up around wise people. You'll wind up, being surrounded by good friends. Ubareach me'anshei resha, and you'll stay away from the wicked people. But that was not his position. He said it's about having a good heart. Someone with a good heart, lo yazizuhu kol ruchos sheba olam. Rabbi Elazar ben Arach's attitude was that having a good heart would be enough, that nothing can impact you. V'lo yefatuhu rishoim le'echos b'darkam. No wicked people are going to be able to. Someone who has a good heart, so the wicked people are not going to be able to influence them. Whatever he watches on TV, whatever he does, it's not going to have that much of an impact. And he can even be b'chevras resha, among the council of the wicked. Pa'alei avon. Therefore, because of his confidence in his Leiv Tov, he went to Frugaisa and Dionysus. He had no problem going off to these places that were less than ideal influences on a person. But when bit by bit they influenced him negatively and he started to forget, his learning was uprooted. He realized, he recognized that's not the only thing. Of course you have to have a good heart. But hearts are very influenced by surroundings. They're very influenced by other people. And therefore, he said, Hachresh haya libam. He said, what does it mean? Who is he talking about? Whose hearts became? So the Gemara could say, it says, their hearts became silent. So one version is, he was talking about the tribes. These 10 lost tribes, these Jews throughout history who were completely lost. Their hearts went silent because they were so desirous of other things. They didn't realize it and they turned off their spiritual sense a little bit. But he says, no, it's talking about his friends. He says, I went out there thinking I would be the influence, and their hearts were very hard to reach. They wound up impacting me. He was talking about the people he was surrounded with. Kikovet ha'even alibi. My good heart was not enough when surrounded by people with silent hearts. That's what he was saying. He recognized that his big error was not having the right friends and not surrounding himself by the right people. And that's why the punchline of the story is that by re-immersing himself into the community of these healthy people, of his friends, his learning returned to him. They prayed on his behalf. They all prayed together. There is a Meiri. I have it in my phone. There is a Meiri who says something really, really interesting about the Gemara says that the Shechina is present. When Brachos Dafav, the Shechina is present when 10 people daven together. When 10 people come for a minyan, the Shekhinah is there. So says the Meiri, whenever a person is able to offer their prayers in synagogue, they should do so, because there the proper concentration of your heart is more possible. Our rabbis laid down a great principle that communal prayer, davening with the tzibur, is desirable, and that those who offer their prayers in the synagogue where there's 10 men, the Shekhinah is with them. This means, says the Meiri, he says this means the ability to concentrate adequately on tefillah is for the worshipers to be nearer to the Shekhinah. That's what it means the Shekhinah is with them. What it means the Shekhinah is with you, any person can connect to God at any time. Even if you're the only person in the world, you can connect to God. So what does it mean in shul you'll have more? The answer is it's conducive to that. And that's what it means, that when there's 10 men, the Shekhinah comes down into the room. It means that davening with a community is a much more effective way. Isn't that unbelievable, Meiri? It's a powerful thing. It teaches you also how to learn an Agada. It's a... Okay. There's a story in the Medrash, it's a Mechilta, which says that Moshe Rabbeinu made a deal with Yisro, his father-in-law, that the first of his children would be dedicated to idolatry. And the Gemara goes on to discuss how Moshe's children, he had a challenge that Gershom, his son Gershom, went on in history to be, a family that was not amazing. There was idolatry in the family. It was a big problem. So Moshe Rabbeinu made a deal that his first son wouldn't have a bris milah, it seems. Simple reading. And that's why when they were traveling, suddenly they were being punished for that son who didn't have a bris milah. How could Moshe have made such a deal? It's a very strange thing. So the Mefarshim say different things. I recently came across a piece from Rav Dessler in the Michtav Milio, Volume 1, where he says something absolutely astonishing. He says he has a piece called Hashbas Hasviva, the impact of your surroundings, of who you hang out with. The impact of your surroundings. And he says the following. He says, people really generally think the normal human attitude is that maybe for small children, it's important where you send them to school, maybe for very weak-minded people. But for the rest of us, we know who we are. I mean, come on, what is the impact? And he says, it's just completely false. He says, you know what this medrash means, that Moshe made the deal? Vayoel Moshe. It means he desired to live with this man. He wanted to live with Yisro. Now, it's true, Yisro wasn't an idolater quite anymore, but he also wasn't on the right path yet. So choosing to live with someone like that and raise your children in their home is the equivalent to giving your children over to idolatry. That's what it is. A commitment to live there is a commitment. If you are going to send your children into the public school system and you're going to send them off to the universities, you have signed them up for idolatry classes, for Avodah Zarah classes. That's what Moshe did. He says that it's not that Moshe intended that. He never would have explicitly made such a deal. But the moment that, and he goes on to talk about the minute you desire something, you already become fakayf to it. You become sold to that thing. The minute you have even a little bit of desire, you react differently. This is an incredibly important thing that my mother would always tell me over from Rabbi Daniel Lapin. She would tell me over for years and years that the minute that a man has seen a woman even once, he loses an enormous degree of free will. And therefore, before the shidduch system is magnificent in that it provides an opportunity for somebody to make a clear-headed decision before they've even seen the person. Because the moment you see the person and you're very attracted to, you lose a certain degree of free choice. But if you would just say, I'm not even going to go out with that person because fill in the blank, which there's a lot of things about. So it's very wise to not. So my mother was always in this situation. We say, oh, well, why don't you just have your son meet this girl? And she was like, absolutely not. He's going to lose his free will. No, first we're going to do our research. I'll call you back in 3 days. What's going to happen in 3 days? Like, what's going to be the problem? I can't look into something. And the alternative is also a good piece of advice. If somebody is suffering from a very serious mental health problem and they want to get married, the best thing they can do is make themselves look as good as possible, right? Do a breath check, whatever they need to do, and then get out there and meet people. And after the person kind of likes you, you've met them 2-3 times, you've gone on a few dates, you can let them know. By the way, I suffer from this debilitating thing, but I do take my pills most of the time. You let them know, and you'll get married. You understand? No, that's very important. But right? Because I said most of the time, because it's very significant. Because that's the best piece of advice for that person: is get out there, find a girl who's going to like you, and then afterwards you'll let her know. You're not going to force her to marry you, right? You're not going to lie and go to the chuppah without disclosing, but you'll disclose it when you're ready, kind of into each other, and that will happen all the time. If there's somebody who's very appealing, very attractive to a person, so then you're willing to, okay, well, I'll look into it. I remember somebody coming to Saba Moshe. I remember him telling us about a young couple that was dating, and it was one or the other who they were dating a few months or whatever it was, and one of them was infertile or something. There was some real challenge with fertility, and that person would never have gone out knowing to begin. Like if he would have had that information, he wouldn't have put himself in this very difficult situation. But now that they kind of liked each other, he liked her perfume, he liked the eyelashes that she had pasted on, and she had painted her lips red. Okay, well, no, I'm sure there was nice qualities also, but I'm saying like they liked each other enough that he was willing to go through this enormous lifetime of treatments and possibly adoption and this and that. And so what happened? And the answer is, when you like somebody, you make decisions differently than when you're doing math. And so Vayoel Moshe says, the minute he desired to live with Yisrael, that itself was almost like a pledge of allegiance to his children being exposed to and being taught Avodah Zarah. So it's a very, very valuable thing to know. And by the way, over the years, when I had the privilege of teaching boys in the more modern Orthodox world, where many of the boys were considering going off to secular college, so I always try to express. I said, no, I'm going to put my tefillin on. So it wasn't so long ago that I had lunch with a boy who did go off to secular college, despite all of his rebellion. No, this is our family's hashkafa, whatever it is. I'm always going to put my tefillin on. And I was very pleased when I met him for lunch that he does still put his tefillin on, Baruch Hashem, every day. He also mentioned to me that his Gentile girlfriend thinks he's crazy for putting on these tefillin every day, but he doesn't miss it. He's got a close relationship with Hashem. So that's a true story. In other words, and he doesn't understand still why people are so close-minded to not just encourage everybody to go off into the secular college dormitory lifestyle. See, I still put my tefillin on. Most people don't keep putting them on, unfortunately. Most people get very into the impact of the social world, of the accessibility to the Shekhinah, because there's another group of people that you connect with who are there davening with you. It's a very meaningful and real thing. Rabbi Elazar ben Aruch, according to this, made that error. Now, it would make a lot of sense now if this is the beginning of the message of HaChodesh Hazer Lachem, of the first mitzvah in the Torah. Somehow, we don't know exactly yet how this is quite that message, but this message of the first mitzvah being deeply related somehow to the relationships that people have with friendship and with community. So you see a connection to why this would be the first mitzvah, as the Jews are coming out of Mitzrayim and they're going to stop being sort of goy mikar of goy. They're going to have their own identity. That this would be a subject that should be on their mind. Listen to the Medrash here in Koheles Rabbah. Chamisha Talmidim hayu lo Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. There were 5 great students of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Kol zman shahaya kayam hayoshin lefanav. As long as he was alive, they all stuck around the neighborhood to be sitting before him and studying Torah. Kishaniftar holchu liyavne. But when he died, they went to Yavne. The halach Rabbi Elazar ben Aruch etzel ishto le'emaos. Rabbi Elazar ben Aruch went to join his wife in Emaos, mikom mayim yafim v'nave yafe, a place with really nice water and beautiful habitation. They didn't just go for Shabbos, you understand, right? They went. That was it. And himtin lohem she'avo etzlo v'lo, and he waited for all the other students to come and join him, but they didn't come. Kivan shelo bo. So now they didn't come. Bikesh leilech etzlam. He said, I better go to them. I can't live here by myself. His wife didn't let him. You see, so even back then, there were people like adult men asking permission for stuff. Just the saddest kind of behavior. Okay, no, I shouldn't say that about one of the Amoraim, but the Medrash said, Lo hinachto ishto. The Gemara says, it's not the way. Okay, when they saw it, right? So Amra, mitzarech lami. You see, she was a very proud person. She said, who needs who? They need me. He understood that he was one of the great people and that he was the person. So she said to him, she says, imagine there's a utensil, right? You have like a utensil filled with food, and there's these hungry mice. So who chases who? Does the food chase the mice? Or do the mice come running for the food? Right? She is a good, very vivid thing. So she said, the mice go to the utensil to the mice. Shamallah, he listened to her and settled there until he forgot his learning. So then it tells the students came to him and they asked him a question and he wasn't able to answer them. And that's the end of the story as it goes over there. So it was a complicated question, and so it doesn't have him reading the Torah. It has different details in this part, this version of the story. But in this version of the story, it adds a lot of flavor because it supports this position of the Shvilei Chaim, who said that his problem was his relationship to community, not realizing the incredible impact that having a relationship with friends, even students, but community, the culture, the experience, being part of something, is a very, very important part of what it means to serve Hashem. And the Avos didn't really have that. Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov were individuals who had to pave their own way. And as they went along, it's interesting how they each established another tefillah, right? Avram Shachris and Yitzchak Mincha and Yaakov Ma'ariv, and they each just were trying to build a family that would turn into something that would eventually become the Jewish people, Yaakov with his children. But it only really became that as they leave Mitzrayim. That's when we go from this sort of individual experience. So, the three letters that he mixed up, listen to this one. This is really going to blow your mind. Rabbi Akiva Eger says this on the page here. He says, look at Ayin Davar Nechbad Bekarnayim Belikutim Shebesof HaSefer. He sends you to Rabbi Shimshon of Astropolia, one of the great Mekubalim, to his comments. Rabbi Akiva Eger on the page of Gemara says that anybody learning this Gemara should go check out this Kabbalistic Sefer and see what he says at the end. So you have to look it up. What he says is that there's a klipa, there's a negative force in the world that causes people to become disconnected from their Torah learning, to forget it. It's called klipas riv, reshud beis, which means riv is when things are at war with each other, when things are inconsistent. So in other words, I want to tell you that's really how memory works effectively. If you have a place to plug it into and it's consistent with your other information, then you know it. If you ever talk to somebody who's got clarity in Torah, you'll be having an experience like this. If I were to ask you, how do you get from your house to Chabad Persian Youth, my favorite name of any shul, right? So, right, I wish there was a Satmar Moroccan middle-aged, but right now there's only Chabad. That's as absurd a name as okay, but so right, I think they took off the youth or they took off the Persian or the I don't know. It's a great name for sure. So imagine I want to say, how do you get from your house? I could tell you right now how to get there. I've never thought about it. I never memorized it, but I'll go out my door. I'll make a left. I'll go down half a block. I'll make a right, about a block and a half, and then make a left turn and go down until I could tell you how to do it. Now, had I done this out the door, make a left, 2 blocks, go, so I could possibly remember that piece of information, but it's basically gibberish. It's not something that's plugged into the way that I understand the world. So, you understand? In other words, when a person has a piece of knowledge, you talk to a person, a Talmud Chacham, who understands the Torah, so they're leaving their house, they're going over to the Gemara, then they're going over to Rabbi Akiva Eger, right? In other words, this is something that fits in to the way that they understand the world. If there's something you do know about, you know who Avraham Avinu is, you know who Sarah Imenu is, and then somebody tells you a Dvar Torah, a Gematria, something, and it plugs into the information you already have, so that can last a very, very long time. But when it's just disjointed, when this seems to be at odds with that, and it's this one and that one, so then memory doesn't really last. And that's where shikha comes in and forgetting your learning. When it's inconsistent with your life, when there's cognitive dissonance, when the way that you're behaving is different than what you're learning, it's very difficult for it to last. When a person feels pulled in one direction, they can often want to give up the whole Judaism. A person who, do you understand this? There's a person who feels like, and you understand this when people talk about their orientation. It's going to be very difficult for somebody who feels, I was born the following way. My identity is that I am this and this sexual orientation. For that reason, this is who I am. And I'm Jewish, and I have a problem. I have these two conflicting identities. I need to find a way. You understand? That's a big challenge. Many, many people, you can understand how that's a big challenge for someone. Well, outside of that, you have a teenage boy whose parents didn't talk to him properly. So he thinks he's the one sicko who keeps noticing girls, right? And there's something really off about him. And so then he feels enormous guilt. Everything he's hearing in the Torah. You know what would be enormously relieving for this child? If he could just let go of this, if this whole Torah thing turns out to be nonsense. And the weight that just came off of his shoulder. What he needs to understand is no. This is not going against your nature. This is not going against the human condition. This is a very healthy system that allows you to use all of these aspects of your personality. And yes, life has its struggles. And for example, in the 28th chapter of the Tanya, he says that a person is trying to daven Shemona Esrei, but he has a problem. He has a problem that he keeps having foreign and alien thoughts. He's talking even about inappropriate thoughts, right? So a person is having these feelings. So he says a person can tell himself there's something really wrong with me. How can I connect to holiness? It's a terrible mistake if you thought that it would be a problem if a person only had one soul, he says. Then it would be weird that while trying to talk to God, it's also pulling you another direction. He says, but it's not one soul, it's two. There's two spirits inside of a person, and they're at war with each other. And the neshama is trying to win over the Yetzer Hara. And he says, then it's a totally reasonable thing. He says, when people battle, the stronger this one gets, the other one puts in all of his strength. He says, like two wrestlers. If a person starts to use more strength, then the other one starts to use more strength. So he says, don't you worry about this. It's nothing to be alarmed about. It's exactly right. It's the human condition. So that's a very important thing. In other words, memory, being able to live consistently with things, memory is what connects yesterday's behavior and the days before. It gives you a story in your life. Who you were 20 years ago and 30 years ago and 5 minutes ago is only one story because of memory. And so that's klipas riv. But he says, Reish Yod Beis, Hacharesh, Haya Libam, the three letters that got substituted in for HaChodesh Zelachem were Reish, Yod, and Beis. Those are the three letters. That's what he was sending to. And that's why he forgot his learning. And the Mefarshim then go on, the Chita and many others say, but Rebbe Huda Hanasi, had a nickname. He was the only one we just call him Rebbe. There's nobody else who got that three-letter name, Rebbe. He says, you know why? Because Rebbe Huda Hanasi came to the world when Jews were forgetting the Torah. And he wrote it down. He made it his mission to take the oral Torah and make sure it will never be forgotten. And therefore he got the name Rebbe, which is a rearranging of the Reish Yod Beis, because one's Rebbe should be able, but the Rabban Shais, right, this great rabbi, Rebbe Huda Hanasi, should be able to show us the consistent message of the Torah, which when things seem to be at war in a person's psyche, in a person's life, in a person's experience, they show you, no, they're not. So that there's this amazing Gemara that says, Impaga b'cha menuvul zeh. If a person has tremendous desire from the Yetzer Hara, moshchehu lebeis medrash. Bring that with you to the beis medrash. That's what it says. Now that's troubling, because I would think if a person is accosted by very negative desires, he should flee from them to the beis medrash. Berach mimenu, not moshchehu. Don't pull it in with you to the beis medrash. I wouldn't think that that's what it would say. So says the Vilna Gaon, Tzadok of Lublin, and others. They say because those desires, the Torah teaches you that there's nothing wrong with those desires either. They just need to be used appropriately. They need to be used correctly. You can serve Hashem b'shnei yitzrecha. The lesson that there's nothing wrong with you, that you're okay, is a lesson that is one of the basic responsibilities of a parent, of a rebbe, of a society, of the friendships. In other words, what's normal? What's to be expected? And therefore, going off on your own can be a very dangerous thing. A very dangerous thing. The Lakute Basar Lakute brings the Sefer Kavod Chachamim, who says, here's what happened. He came back. Rabbi Elazar ben Aruch came back to teach Parshas HaChodesh, to teach this Parsha of the Torah, Lidrosh be'enyonei ha'ibur. One of the most challenging parts of Torah is to teach about Ibur. Ibur is the secrets of the most complex part of the Rambam, is to try to understand how we calculate months and all the complicated mathematics that's involved in the different traditions. And it's remarkable how much they knew back to the times of the Gemara about lunar, like things that today they're down to like decimal points. They were still correct about all these incredible calculations about years and getting the leap years correct and all the other things that the rest of the ancient world was not getting right. So the Jewish year had it right, but he wanted to teach these very complicated things. But he sensed that he wasn't so sharp about these material anymore, this very, very difficult material. because he was teaching the psukim of Achodesh Zelochem. As part of this, himlitz alatzmo melitza. He invented hacharesh hayalibam. He said it himself. It wasn't a mistake. He said himself that I can't read this right. I'm not getting this right. And he used this language. Kelomar oz omar kimis onen al masha karolo. Shenitamtemu libo v'sichlo. He felt that his mind and his way of thinking was closing up. Okay. So where did this come from? There was this famous partnership throughout history of Yisachar and Zavulun. Yisachar and Zavulun were these two full tribes. They were business people. Both of them were business people in the sense that Yisachar had a commodity, and that was that he was learning Torah the whole day, and that was of value to Zavulun. Zavulun had a commodity called being very, very wealthy. So the people from Zavulun said, listen, we need to make a deal here. We'll support you guys, but you give us 50% of your learning because you're not going to be able to learn otherwise. And they recognize they're not Shevet Levi exactly. Shevet Levi is somebody who says, I trust Hashem totally. They don't make any deals. They don't. But Shevet Yisachar, no, they have a deal. They made a deal with a businessman. So I'll learn, and you do this. And they made this amazing deal. And an entire tribe of Jewish people. This relationship was very interesting. Now where did it come from? So Leah Imenu was very, very proactive in making sure that she could continue to have children. And the Torah describes her going out and making sure to get the dudaim, right, from her son Reuben, and then trading them with Rachel in order that she should have an exchange. She went out proactively to tell Yaakov, right, Yaakov comes back from the field, and she says, you're going to come with me tonight because I purchased the opportunity. And it says that that's from there Yisachar was born. And it says about this in the Gemara that that when a woman in a productive way, right, sees to it that she should have that kind of relationship with her husband in just the right way and make sure so then they'll have children, the children will be so brilliant in Torah like Yisachar, and they'll be capable of being me'aber Chodoshim Vishanim. They'll be very capable of the most complex calculations of the moon and the sun and trying to put them together. Ibur Shana is how you balance the moon and the sun so that they work together properly and they aren't just two separate cycles like the Arab world and the Christian world. It's just two separate, right? And Ramadan keeps moving around from month to month. So that's not what we do. HaChodesh Zelachem is where we learn that we need to balance the sun and the moon. Ooh. So this might help us. You see, it's on a pasuk. The pasuk says, "Umibnei Yisachar yodei bina, lodas." Yeah, they were yodei bina lo'itin. The children of Yisachar were very knowledgeable in bina, in the insight that they had in itin, in seasons. So they were good at this sort of a thing. So now we're going to get to the next step. You see, HaChodesh Zelachem seems to be talking about the sun and the moon. And that we follow a certain calendar, that while on the one hand we follow the lunar calendar, but it's got a mixed matchup with the solar calendar, which is Nisan always falling out in the spring. And what on earth does that have to do with friendship, with rabbeim, with students, going to your students, how much the rabbi needs his students and the students need the rabbi, and the friendships that are created? What is the actual mitzvah of following? So the answer is it has a lot to do with it. Because the sun and the moon are, say the Mefarshim all over the place, mashpia and mekabel. When you look at the way the sun and the moon relate to one another, the sun is the source of a great deal of energy and light, and the moon reflects the light of the sun, right? It receives and then gives back and it lights up the world. And for that reason, the Jewish people are compared to the moon, because Hashem is the source, of course, of all light and all goodness, but it's our job to receive that and then reflect it back. The Gemara in Brachos has many indications, and the Mepharshim say this, talks about when a person sees this or that in a dream, and the moon consistently represents the wife, and things like pregnancy. In fact, we even talk about Chodesh HaIbur and Ashana Me'uberes. We talk about the moon with language as if it's pregnant. When there's an extra month in the year, it's called a pregnant year. Ashana Me'uberes, which is like a very interesting language. And the Mefarshim talk about this, that the moon, which is supposed to be like the Jewish people, almost like the wife of Hashem, that you can have a man with all kinds of wonderful potential. There will never be a child born into the world unless somebody will receive that shefa, right? And then, so in a certain way, we are a light to the nations as the, okay. So the sun and the moon is a very beautiful relationship between us and Hashem. In our lives, every human being is in some relationships the sun, and in some relationships the moon. In every human being. For example, even the great rabbis would say that I learned more from my students. I wound up benefiting from them in this very interesting way. Gemilus chasadim is that more than the balabayas gives to the poor person, the Balabais receives from the poor person. So these relationships, even within one relationship, they can be reciprocal in many ways. And a person can be both a sun and a moon in the same relationship. In other words, for some things you receive and for some things you give. And it's a very complex. We see that with Hashem all the time. With Shabbos, for example, sometimes we're the chassan and Shabbos is the kala. And sometimes the Torah is the right. And this way, and who's marrying who. And it keeps going back and forth. And the same. That's just it. That's real life. So the relationship between Rabbi Elazar ben Arach and his ability to be an effective, powerful Talmid Chacham, his wife says, who needs who? And he responded, they need me. And then without them, he forgot his learning. So who needed who? So the answer is this understanding of the relationship between the sun and the moon, and how they have to be balanced, and how is it deeply Torah, the husband and wife. On the one hand, the man, the Gemara says, is supposed to be the one who chases the woman. And yet in this case, Leah, in a very specific way, but the way that she handled herself by being proactive, which is normally not as modest as you would expect. And when misused, it's Esav-like behavior. She could have married Esav. And her daughter Dinah is called Yatzonis because she stepped out in a way that she shouldn't have stepped. The same thing being used inappropriately, but she used it the right way. So then sometimes the moon, right, has to be a little bit more of a sun, and sometimes the sun has to be a little more. This balance that's constantly there between the relationships between one human being and another means that a sun needs to understand, no matter how powerful it is, that it also needs that moon to reflect that light in the night times. And this is a very important role for the moon in times of darkness. Anybody who's ever been at it, I remember once going on a hike in summer camp in Yerushalayim when I was 16. They took us on a hike where there was no light anywhere, and nobody had cell phones back then, and you couldn't bring, they did have. I shouldn't say no one had cell phones. There was like those Nokia ones with Snake on it. Remember that game, Snake? Okay, but other than that, there was no light, but it was bright from the moon. You could really see quite a bit when you're in a place like that, and you see the impact. So it wasn't like the sun being out. But you could really see, you could see people's faces, you could interact. So that contribution of the moon shouldn't be forgotten by the sun. Additionally, why is it that when the Balabayas does something for the ani, he gets more out of it? So the Rambam writes the language that when a person gives, when he's talking about Matanos Levyanim actually, he says that what's so great, the great joy that a person has of giving to the poor is because he's Domeh L'Shechina, because he's imitating God. And the greatest joy, ultimately, is for a person to have that level, to be able to imitate God. So the opportunity to give chesed, to give to the needy, he says specifically to make umlalim, people who are downcast, to make them happy. He says especially converts, he says especially orphans and widows and impoverished people. Umlalim elu is Domeh L'Shechina, is similar to Hashem. So the opportunity, so who's benefiting from who, always becomes an interesting question in relationships. And this requirement, the idea that a person who's the Rebbe can forget all of his Torah if he doesn't have people to give it over to, people to teach, to force him to be Talmidei Yosef Mikulam. And that's a very, very important lesson then. The idea that Hashem says, the very first message that I'm giving you as a people is Achodesh Zelachem. You're going to have your own way of calculating years, and you're going to make sure that you understand the importance of the moon and the importance of the sun. You're going to live with both of them. You're going to understand that with what you can't just be one. You can't just be a giver. You can't just be a taker. You have to be in a reciprocal relationship which is the lesson of the Ma'oros. And that was fascinatingly then, you find this Yisachar, this amazing Yisachar, who his whole name, which which is like a fascinating thing, how the first time we read it in the Torah, there's a minute to say Yisaschar, Yisaschar. And then from then on we say Yisachar. That's how we pronounce the name. Some Hasidim still say Yisaschar the whole way through. But so the das that came to Mibali Tos is, why do we do that? So you can see in the Chin of Echista, Frankel edition, you'll find that it says over there a beautiful thing. The Bali Tosos. It says because the name Yisachar is because Sachor Sechaticha, because she went out and she purchased the opportunity to have this child, this opportunity with Yaakov Avinu. She purchased it from her sister. It wasn't her night. So you have to understand the name. The Torah has to tell you the name. So Yisachar is Sachor Sechaticha. The pasuk says you can't explain the pasuk if you drop that letter. Why don't we pronounce it? Because it's embarrassing. It's not the covered. What kind of a name is that? I mean, every time you mention him, you discuss the act of conception. I mean, that's not the way that Jewish people don't talk like that. So his name became Yisachar, which kind of glosses over. That's what the kingdom says. In other words, the way we pronounce the name throughout the rest of Torah is the other way. It's just the first time because the pasuk is letting you know the actual origins of the name that we need to highlight it and to pronounce it that way. It's a very interesting thing. So, what is the punchline? I mean, the Jewish people going from individuals who have to serve Hashem to being a people. So they learn with this very first mitzvah that we have an enormous responsibility as part of a community to balance the sun and the moon. That there is giving, there's sun, right, and there's the moon. There's that which we receive from others. You have to know that both of those are critical to your own growth. They're critical to your own experience in this world. The Jewish people need to know this, that what we receive and what we give is equally important. Sometimes, and Odessa also does a great deal of writing about this one. It's a famous thing, but sometimes the biggest thing you can do for somebody is to listen to them. Sometimes the biggest thing you can do for somebody is to take something from them. And we sort of know this. If someone has a little grandchild who comes running in and says, look, I brought you flowers, and they have like some weeds or something, right? They drew you a picture and it's not very good. It looks nothing like what they say it is. Look, I made an elephant. This is not an elephant. I don't see anything elephantine about it, right? And what do you say? You say, thank you, I love it. You understand? Thank you very much. You take the weeds that they brought you as a flower, you say, they're beautiful, and later you can say, we get those out of my kitchen, and what are you drawing me these gibberish, these nonsense things? Come back when you've taken, when you finish Juilliard, and you know a little bit about art and presentation. You don't say any of these things to them. And the answer is that in every interaction, a person has the opportunity to be a giver, to be a son, but sometimes the greatest thing you can do for someone is allow them to shine, allow them to say something, allow them to feel good. And that's the characteristic that is such an important balance in the creation of a nation, in the creation of a community. So, HaChodesh Zelachem Rosh Chodashim, this month of Nisan that's coming up, that we're going to read about the Shabbos in Parshas HaChodesh, is a month of the Jewish people developing their character, developing who they were. And it says that a person who greets the new month, right? It's a Gemara. The Gemara says that anybody who is zoche to greet the new month, to do Kiddush Levana and greet the new month, it's as if he greeted the Shechina. That's what it's like. That's like it's as significant as greeting the Shechina, and the Gemara proves it from two psukim. HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem. So that somehow relating to the moon, and Zeh Keli Ve'anvehu. That's the Gemara's proof. So, in other words, the ability to stand at the Yam Suf and point to God and say, this is my God, that level of religious clarity. Most things in life are ko. Most prophets had nevuah with the word ko. Ko. Something like this. It's vague. Most spiritual things in your life are ko. You understand? In other words, zeh is like, this is a table. This is zeh. You can point to it with your finger. Now, what is kedusha, everybody? Well, it's something like, right? When I start to talk about any spiritual value, what is love, right? So it's not the baby don't hurt me no more. Like, that's not what Hadaway. Right? So what is love? Like, and the answer is, well, It feels like this is something like that. It goes from zeh to ko pretty quickly the minute you start talking about these broad topics. But at the Yam Suf, it was zeh. Um, it was zeh Pesach ba'avur zeh asa Hashem li b'tzeisi mitzrayim. Um, in other words, and the Mefarshim connect that to the Zeh, like sitting there with matzah and mar. In other words, there is this clarity that a person can experience religiously. And we're told that the place that it comes from is this proper balance of the sun and the moon, the proper balance of looking at. So one of the angles that we're sharing this year is that this proper balance is the impact of a person on their community around them and the impact that the community has upon them. And that's a very, very precious thing. I'll tell you one practical, very, very practical application of this for children, um, for families. It's something that I learned from my Rebbeim that a mother gives Judaism to the child. Whether or not you're Jewish depends upon the mother. She's Jewish, the baby's Jewish. But where does your shevet come from? Your tribe. So the home is very much colored by the mother. But where does the shevet, where does your tribe come from? That is given to you by your father. That's how that works. Whatever your father's tribe was, that's what tribe you are. And what that means, says Rabbi Kayla Shlita, is that it's the father's job to connect that family, that healthy, good unit of a family, into the community. It's his job that his children should feel like they're part of something. So if that family is, living somewhere and they decide we're going to be Satmar Hasidim, so it becomes the father's job to dress the part and to bring home those sort of values and tell the stories about Tzaddikim and Matzei Shabbos and make sure, that there's no pictures of the Kaisel anywhere, whatever the important values are, right? No, so we love the Satmar Chazim, but like whatever their attitude is towards Yiddishkeit, so then they need to make sure they're educating the children in that beautiful way, and it's connected. One of the worst things that can sometimes happen is where you have a family who the father's very into the fact that he's different than everyone. And so he takes the kids to shul somewhere, and they stand a little bit in the back. Like, we're definitely not part of these people. I mean, we like some things about Chabad, so we're going to the Chabad, but we're not this. And we're going to send you to that school, but we're not going to. In other words, it's not consistent with. It becomes very difficult for those family members to connect in to the world. Even today, just on the one end, we're very fiercely individual people. All human beings want to be themselves, and we want to be. And at the same time, we crave this connection. And we learn from the Meiri that it's very hard to connect to Hashem in the same way without a room full of people that you are part of. That you're part of the minyan, that you're part of the group. It's a very difficult thing. Sometimes by no fault of their own. There are people who are rejected by communities and they're not part of things. And that's a very challenging thing because this religion was not created just for individuals. The very, very first mitzvah is telling you about the sun and the moon. It's telling you about how the community interacts with one another. It's telling you that that's going to be as we come unified and proper to the Yam Suf and then eventually to Har Sinai, Ki Ish Echad B'Lev Echad, that there has to be that connection and the way that that happens. And so it becomes an important thing. In other words, it becomes an important thing for parents to figure out how am I doing my kid any favors here? If I'm going to send them to a school that has a certain set of values, am I going to live with those values? Am I going to share those? I'm going to address the part so that he feels right. And again, this is not to try to take away anybody's individuality, but it's a very important thing to consider, even on a practical level. If a person were to look and say, you know what? And I see this all the time. People who would look and say, this is kind of where I want my children when they're in high school or when they're in seminary or when they're 20 years old. Right? So am I setting them up that they'll be comfortable with that? Or am I setting them up that they're going to look at all those people as if they're bonkers and they're crazy and there's no way they could ever be part of that? And all those boys who learn Torah, the girl's going to say, yeah, but they're all weird. They're all in Lakewood. They all use Yiddish words and they pepper their conversation with they say mamish and taka and grada and epis. And I can't be around those people. They're weird. So who have you left your daughter to marry? Who have you understand? It's by not integrating, taking responsibility that who are the friends? What is the community? What are the realities on the ground? Where am I setting myself up? It's a very, very important thing for us to consider, to balance where we're sending them to summer camp, where we're sending them to the yeshiva. What world are we ourselves establishing and entrenching ourselves in? There's a tremendous value. To it. It's not to be underestimated, especially if you meet people who themselves kind of had to reinvent this wheel and they're very much on their own. They'll tell you that it could be a very lonely experience. It could be a very challenging experience. And the incredible power, even for someone like Rabbi Elazar ben Arach, who's one of the real heroes. Um, feeling very much that he's part of something. The final application of this, and we'll finish with this. The final application of this is what we started with, and that is the feeling that Rabbi Guterman was writing about of being comfortable among the Jewish people. That we have our language, we have our culture, we have our foods, we have our and like we're comfortable with that. We get our validation from that crowd. We have our own names that we think are in style and are cool. We don't have to. I don't know what's cool now. Probably Humphrey. It's probably coming back in, right? I don't know. All the other. It'll be back soon, right? Humphrey and Agnes. I think are going to be the two top names of the next 10 years. That's my prediction. They're coming back. These interesting names are coming back. So, but that's just not for us. Not for us. We don't have January and February. We're not busy with. I mean, of course, we have to live in the real world, and you can't. In America, I don't think you can write the Nissan on your checks. In Eretz Yisrael, you can. You notice the bank accepts the Jewish date in Israel, which is a very nice thing. But in the United States, you're allowed to live with this. But are they Hebrew schools or are they Talmud Torahs? He says. Are they, like we should be able to have with pride. It helps a lot. It helps a lot, especially today when we're facing a lot of antagonism and a lot of people who think we're just the worst human beings ever to walk the face of the earth. They've been saying it for a couple thousand years. And our communities, our very, very strong communities, are very powerful communities of Hachodesh Zelachem, of communities where people give and people receive and people have their roles in the community that are precious and valuable. We know who we are. So that itself is the strongest thing to invest in terms of Jewish continuity. Sending children to a Jewish school of any kind, especially an Orthodox Jewish school of any kind, is like the guarantee that they're hundreds of times less likely to intermarry, to assimilate, and it's not so much only. In other words, it's not because they're learning Torah there. That's also really important. But in my opinion, the main thing is the healthy culture, the Torah Jewish culture and experience of we are part of this nation, we're part of this people, we're proud to be part of this. It's such an important thing for us to reinforce in ourselves. And like Rav Dessler said, a person should never think that that's for children. It's even true for Moshe Rabbeinu. He says that making sure that we surround ourselves and our families with just healthy, good, strong influences, Rabbeim, Chaverim, people, right, who are friends, people who are teaching, people. If we have something to teach, make sure you can find some students to teach it to, because don't think who needs who. Let them come to me. That was the famous last words of Mrs. Elazar ben Arach. Everything went backwards from there. So that's what we can do to focus on our investment personally in the Torah community, in the Jewish community, and having a role in our communities, in our shuls, in the places in which we experience Torah. And whether that role is as a student, whether that role is as a teacher, most likely you'll find that that role is both. That almost in every relationship, there's a way that a person can be both a sun and a moon, and like Yisachar, teaming up to bring out the best in others, and being that one, who creates this entire tribe of people who are dedicated to partnering up with their friends in Zavulun. Um, this is the magnificent role of those who have the bina, who have the insights to balance the sun and the moon. Um, may it be a very meaningful Parshas HaChodesh, Shabbos HaChodesh, and month of Nisan, where we see all kinds of miracles.
School? School. Nice.